Hello and welcome to our Sustaining Healthy Relationships podcasts. In March 2022, Relate NI commissioned Ulster University to carry out evidence-based research on healthy relationships and their importance across our lifespans. These podcasts delve a little deeper into our findings and we bring them to life with experts unpacking particular findings. Enjoy. Edell McKee, you are very welcome and thank you for participating in our series of podcasts.
Thanks for inviting me, Kelly.
Can you tell me a wee bit about the work that you do?
Okay, so at the minute I am employed by Barnardo's as a project worker in Maghaberry Prison. The project we work on is called Parental Matters. So we are based in the 3 prison establishments in Northern Ireland, and our role would be to really just work with people in prison who are dads or expecting parents, and our role would be to support them with their relationship with their families and their children. Obviously Barnardo's, our focus is the children, but as you know yourself, Kelly, when you're working with it's the families, it's the whole family you end up working with. So I've been doing that for about 2 years now, and prior to that I was working in another organisation supporting children of families and family members of prisoners. So I suppose I'd done that for 6 years, and it was really give me the insight as to the really importance of making those relationships work when someone goes into custody. I suppose, to be honest, a lot of the work was with children, and I suppose like a lot of these children are known to other services, but for different reasons. But you know, the actual effect of someone belonging to you being into prison, be it a parent or be it a sibling, it really affects them quite badly. A lot of children who's got a member of their family in prison often lose contact with that person. And I think, you know, our role is to really, obviously within the best interest of the child, is to really promote the relationship. I suppose like children of prisoners have a lot to deal with. You know, I suppose what I want to say is I don't want to minimise the impact of the victims, you know, the impact on them. However, you know, I suppose the families of prisoners are often the forgotten ones. And children internalise stuff, and very often parents don't know what to tell them. Yeah. They don't know where to start. So, you know, it's about, as well as that, supporting the parents to support the children, really. Yeah. And a lot of people in prison don't realise just how much is affecting the children. At the minute now, Barnardo's, our support in the prisons would vary across the establishments. So for example, in Maghaberry, we would probably, most of our work is probably through programmes and courses. We do offer individual support as well, and in McGilligan there probably would be more one-to-one support, because obviously excuse me, when they get to McGilligan they are sentenced, they're fairly more settled, and some of the initial retention of the family relationship is done in Maghaberry, or in the other establishment would be Hydebank. So a colleague of mine would work very much with the women, and then the young offenders as well. And I suppose, you know, when you come in, when someone comes into prison, there's so much going on for them. Yeah. And
it's chaotic.
It's chaotic, and they're very much, you know, full of fear and a lot of them are dealing with other big issues. Mm-hmm. And I suppose it's really important for us that we don't particularly, you know, people in prison get a lot of information whenever they first come in through the door, and very often, including information from ourselves, but very often they're not in the right headspace to actually engage. Yeah. Okay.
Well, we would find that here. I mean, people are calling up for counselling services, for example, and our schedulers are giving them information. Here, you know, read this, sign that, you need to turn up this, that and the other, and you just know that if your life's chaotic and your mind's whirling, you're not in the headspace to be taking in that information.
Not at all. And I mean, very often, you know, a lot of them can't make contact with their family. So I suppose in my experience of working with the families, you know, as well, and you know, on the outside of prison, it was really, really important then that we, in the other project I worked on, we come in and we got in contact with the families for them initially and explained to the families exactly, because for families the thought of coming to a prison or contacting a prison can be not only impossible but very daunting.
It was daunting for me to come in and deliver those workshops for you. Even getting into the prison complex is a handling on its own. And I was going in to do a bit of work. Never mind going to see a loved one. Never mind the whole emotional, you know, the chaos around that as well.
Absolutely. So in terms of they really, you know, the support that they would get when their loved one first goes in is really, really instrumental to them. Because you can talk to them, and we can talk to them about, you know, I've dealt with families who have absolutely no clue whatsoever as to what they can access, how to book visits, what their loved one's entitled to, and things like that. So it's really, really important that they get that from the offset, because very often, you know, the relationship with the family is the key thing that keeps them together, you know. And I suppose, like, if they lose it at that stage, it can be quite difficult then to, you know, to sort of pick that up again. Whereas if someone's supporting them through that process and through that transition from the home into the prison, and then right through the prison, you know, while their time in prison, but also then on the, you know, whenever they're coming out of prison, like, in fairness, there is a good lot of services in the prison, but, you know, these family relationships, a lot of it is about when they get released. And, you know, Kelly, an awful lot of the families, or an awful lot of the dads leaving prison are either not allowed to go back to the family home, or the relationships broke down. And it's really, really important that they're supported at that time.
Talk me through the difference, I suppose, Edell, in somebody who has had, you know, you have been working with them, so they've gone into prison, you've been working with the families, there's family contact and connection, and there was a lot of talk about the big visit when I was there. So the big visit happens, and then somebody's able to transition back out again, so because that support's been provided to somebody who has lost contact with their family, they're in prison. Just talk me through those two different scenarios and what you've seen in your experience.
Well, in my experience, you know, I suppose that when we were working on the Family Matters Lantern, we had contact with the family, so we were able to support the family, the children and the dad, and I think that's part of the missing link, because there's different agencies in the prison, and there's also community and voluntary sector agencies who work with families of prisoners, but it's the continuity of care, and the problem
building
is
relationships effectively with them.
And I mean, you know yourself, like, the resources at the minute are, you know, with the whole cost of living crisis, and then the government not in last year. I mean, community and voluntary sector are really struggling to get funding, and therefore that's hard to provide continuous care when your funding's cut all of a sudden. Big issue, like, you know, is, as well as the family relationships, Kelly, you know, we in the parenting course we talk very much about their own experiences as a child, and I mean it's really, really a significant amount of people in prison have had very unhealthy childhoods and very unhealthy relationships in childhoods, and then, you know, a lot of that, you know, people talk about, you know, the revolving door of crime and people coming back in and the detrimental effect that has in families, and there's no doubt about that, but I suppose it's about looking at about what they have come through, you know, and it's that, you know, a lot of organisations talk about looking at people in custody or looking at families in crisis as a result of imprisonment with a trauma lens, and for me it's much more than just, you know, that approach, because the trauma, you know, it's more about people gaining knowledge and really understanding the trauma. Like, for example, we have a lot of people who, obviously we do parenting styles in our programmes. It's a central part of it is sort of like looking at how we were parented, because you know yourself, that is how we are parented.
It's how we end up parenting.
Absolutely, you know, and it's and a lot, and they talk about intergenerational, you know, crime, and you know, but we carry our own traditions through the generations as well. So, in terms of how they were treated as children or how their lives evolved as children, you know, we are looking at a lot of people who maybe come through the troubles.
Yeah.
Community, you know, relationships in the community as well as the family. So, I mean, I would talk to some of the dads would tell me about things that happened in their childhood that was normal for them.
Yeah.
And they're so traumatic, you know, and for them not to have dealt with that trauma, you know, it obviously doesn't justify, you know, their crimes, but it helps you get an understanding. And you need to have an understanding of where they're starting from, because it's so hard for them to you know, it's so hard for them to realise it. They need support to realise sometimes what the trauma they've been through themselves.
And then we have like a narrative in society, you know, like, oh, throw away the key, you know, you've done the crime, do the time. But I think we've stopped looking at, but why does that person, it's like saying, you know, all young people aren't bad young people. Things happen to them and put them in situations where they end up doing things and then they end up maybe in prison. And I think we've lost the ability or the empathy even to do that, going, I don't think that you got up one morning and decided to be a bad person or commit that crime. There has been multiple things that have happened to you, but we don't even have the time or the capacity going, not interested, you did a crime,
Absolutely.
you do the time, throw away the key, don't care about the other, you know, as you call them, I think the invisible or the silent victims who are the loved ones of that person as well, because we are families and we are all connected.
Yeah. And I suppose, like, lately, obviously we have been had more time, we're more settled into the prison now post-COVID, and a lot of what I'm finding is early intervention. So we now have taken a focus in Barnardo's where we approach as many new offenders as possible, because we reckon the early intervention, for example, sometimes the statutory services, I mean, all know they're under-resourced as much as we are, but sometimes, for example, you know, a prisoner trying to get in touch with social services is virtually impossible. A professional trying to get in touch with social services at times is virtually impossible because we know they're up to their eyes. But as I say, in what we would do is we would go into that family and see, first of all, our first contact would be, if social services are involved, make contact with them and say, what is in the best interest of the child here? You know, and very often you find that even for dads to get updates regarding their children, so we support them with all that. And recently, you know, we had a daddy there who had two children, and they were really not able to cope with him in prison, and they were refusing to see him, and they were just very angry. Obviously, 14-year-olds are angry.
Yeah.
And we were sort of trying encouraging dad to write, but dad wasn't very articulate, as many of them aren't. And we talked about that, and in the past he had written letters to the children, and without realising that he had emotionally dumped on them. He had projected his sadness onto the children and his disillusionment, and it wasn't a positive impact on their emotional well-being. So we've sat down now and decided to go through that with dads, you know, age appropriate. We do ages and stages of developments, age appropriate contact with the families as well, you know. The other thing that obviously you and I did was the healthy relations bit. And I mean, like, you know yourself, like, how you found that in the prison. Yeah,
it was really interesting, and they were really, you know, very articulate, had kind of all the answers, a very, very engaging, very charismatic group, a group of men who, that we did, I think we did 2 workshops with them. It was interesting. They were extremely motivated. They were so excited about the big meeting, the big visit, and to see just the motivation and the support that they had for each other as well. They were actually, you know, the support that I saw between them there was a real comradeship there, in terms of they saw their role as fathers, they wanted to fulfil that role as fathers, and that's what was driving and motivating them on. And this big family meeting was, you know, it was the bee's knees, and that's what they were heading towards. And I can only imagine being in prison, you need something to hang on to, something that's going to motivate you, something that gives you a drive that's not, well, here's this, I'm in jail and what am I going to do?
Yeah, and and I've done some of the stuff that you've done in the sessions. I've continued it on and incorporated in our sessions. And like, for example, we do exercises around healthy and unhealthy relationships. And it's very telling that the dads are very, very quickly able to identify healthy versus unhealthy.
Yeah.
However, when it becomes abusive,
Yeah.
they don't get the fine line.
Yeah.
They really don't.
Yeah.
And I suppose part of that is, trying to support them to understand the difference between, and the warning signals. So if your relationship is unhealthy, then you need to address it at that stage before it gets to the
abusive.
Abusive. Yeah. And I suppose a lot of the young guys in prison, a big thing for them is, the consent bit.
Yeah.
Like social media has definitely, in my experience, social media has definitely impacted on the young adults' view of what is consent.
Absolutely.
And we're lucky enough at the minute because we're working alongside an organisation called the White Ribbon, and they're now coming into Maghaberry to do healthy, unhealthy relationships, domestic violence. Yeah. And at the minute there seems to be really good uptake on that. I suppose from us it's about gaining that relationship with them.
Yeah.
The other thing that really not surprised me but really enlightens me and gives me the drive is the hope. Barnardo's we're very based in hope, as that's one of our main values. And when we go into prison, the reality is once people in prison do settle down in the regime, there is opportunities for them to engage, and very often we're getting them at their best. There's no doubt about it. We are getting them at a time when they're engaging in education, they're engaging in sports, they're doing they're doing as much as they can in prison. But not only that, maybe for the first time in their lives or their first time since they were a teenager, they've a clear head.
Yeah,
and that is, I suppose, something that I feel we need to be promoting very much in terms of when we're in the prison and we get them at that stage. So when I speak to advocate for dads with social workers, obviously, as I said before, with the best interests of the child at the centre, I would also advocate and say, this could be the motivational factor here. Allowing him to have some sort of contact with his children, giving him feedback from his children, that may be the motivating factor when he is openly and ready saying, I want help, because once again, as you know, our services are voluntary in the prison. Yeah. I think that's really, really important, that's recognised, because the problem is when they go back into their community, if they haven't sought support or they haven't engaged in parenting programmes and things like that, there definitely is a lesser chance of them resettling back into the home effectively, adopting a more positive approach to parenting, putting their children's needs first, so that is there's much more chance of that if they do engage in parenting programmes in prison. And I suppose, as I said, it's the biggest challenge for them is the day they're released.
Yeah. One of the recommendations from our research, so you know that these podcasts are off the back of our research, so one of the recommendations of our research was for government to look at healthy relationship strategy and stop siloing different services. So talk to us about the amount of services prisoners would come into contact with. So we were talking to another podcast about care experienced young people. So it could be 10, 11, 12 adults in a room in a case conference talking about this one young person. So what's that like? So our healthy relationship strategy is start at the healthy relationship stage and then slot everything in under that, as opposed to going, this is health, this is justice, this is education, this is communities, for example.
Yeah. No, well, people in prison and their families go through an awful lot of services and there's an awful lot of involvement and people that they have to engage in throughout their process. And I suppose, we think about the initial PSNI, obviously at the time of arrest, and I suppose, Kelly, it's really important for me to highlight how traumatic that can be for children if they're present, and families. And I've experienced that firsthand from people who have been present at the time of arrest. And I suppose that is something that we would like to see more thought given to the children and the families. And then obviously, that would be then there would be the prison service itself. Now the prison service has a commitment to families. They have developed and have implemented a number of things in the family strategy. And I suppose they also recognise the importance of families. However, when a person comes into prison, obviously their first obligation is to the safety of that person. And that can be very daunting for a lot of people coming into prison. And as I said, more so for their families. Yeah. They're not knowing it's a terrible thing, for the families. And then obviously when they're in prison, when someone enters custody, they're like, so say for example your GP is based in the Northern or Southern Trust. When you enter a custody, you're no longer cared for by that trust. You're then coming under the Southeastern Trust, and that can be difficult to navigate for a lot of families, because a lot of families at that stage are very concerned about the person getting the proper medication or getting the medical attention that they need, and that can be quite difficult to navigate, obviously because consent. So if a family rings in about a member, or family's worried about a member of their family in prison, obviously they can't, and that's natural. It's treated the normal way it is treated in terms of data protection, GDPR and everything, and that can be quite difficult as well. And then you have probation. So probation would work very, very much alongside the person in prison in terms of their needs and in terms of what they need, what would be good for them to get involved with and stuff. Obviously, social services has a big role to play where there's family involved, and it's just a pity that the numbers in the Maghaberry at the minute are just, they're through the roof, like the highest they've ever been. Yeah. It's way beyond capacity. So for us to reach as many of the dads to try and really keep that communication flow going between social services and the dad and the family, we're very limited as to how much we can do that.
And in terms of capacity as well, if there's more prisoners, then that means they're locked up longer because of the staffing issues as well. So absolutely,
and I suppose that was part of why Family Matters, the course that because it was a dedicated landfill, as for dads, but because of the resources and because there were so many complications after COVID that they just couldn't justify it, leaving like half a lantern full of dads and the other half empty when they're bursting at the seams. So we are now doing a new course called Family First, and it's once again it's quite similar to Family Matters without the lantern as such. The dads come from all the different houses and go back to their own houses. They don't have the opportunity then to sort of be with the dads all the time. Yeah.
And are you finding a difference in that?
I'm finding there's advantages and disadvantages to it. One major advantage is we are reaching more dads because we're now taking in the whole prison population as opposed to just one house. Yeah. The other thing is, one of the criteria for that previous course was that dads had to be drug free. Yeah. And that sounds very simple. It sounds very but there's more complex issues around that. Yeah. And if someone's trying to come off drugs or they're on medication for drugs or for whatever reason they're medicating, it once again, it's like a catch-22 situation. If you don't allow them to participate in these programs, then how are you going to motivate them? Yeah. So we're finding that we're managing that quite well. Obviously, there is criteria. Yeah. The dad has to be motivated. The dad has to be, we would take them to a process where we would make sure that they're ready at the stage of their journey. Because as I say, for some dads, it's about the priority of getting the relationship, maintaining the family relationship is enough stress for everybody, and then maybe not the right time, so we would reassess that and take them possibly at the right time. The good thing about it is unfortunately we don't get a big visit every month, but there is a big family visit at the end of it. And that's something that, once again, resources are limited for. But there is child-centred visits in Maghaberry Prison and the other prisons, which is so much better for families coming in order to sit down with dad. They're not sitting at a desk with the way they are. Dads can, get involved with the children's play and stuff. And it's working. It works really well. But it's just, as I say, it's just nobody has the resources to make that as widely available as we'd like to.
Well, I'm going to give you a magic wand.
Okay.
And 3 wishes if you want, in terms of healthy relationships, prisoners and their families. So here's your magic wand. What are you going to wish for?
Well, obviously, you're probably sick listening to me banging on, but more resources.
No, I mean, look, it's blatantly obvious that we need more resources. So bang on about resources all you want. Yeah,
no, I definitely think more resources, both in prison and outside prison. I suppose sometimes I feel that the statutory services don't actually really know what's available in prison, and don't really get the benefits of working with dads in prison. Very often the dads will they'll tell us that I haven't heard from a social worker in months and whatever, and I don't think it's the social worker intentionally going out, because, as I say, they're under resourced as well. Yeah. But it's just, I suppose, if the statutory service were more aware that we're in the prison, and we can be the link for a lot of dads in terms of even just moving on the communication. Yeah. Be that in writing. Like even we have worked with dads in prison whose children have been adopted, and we can still work with them in terms of hope and in terms of indirect contact. Yeah.
So we want more resources, and we want a comms strategy then as well.
Absolutely.
So they know exactly what's available. Great.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I suppose I would like people to be more, be able to recognise, to be able to have more knowledge as to the impact on the children. Yeah. And I think the children, these children are definitely stigmatised. I think the criminal justice system, in my opinion, isn't supporting the children well enough. I mean, for example, some of the children I work with, Kelly, their dad's address has been given out. Whenever they've been arrested, where the dad's from, and those children, maybe it's on social media and it's where daddy's residing, and it's not helpful for children. It's not good for their mental health. It's not good. You talk about isolating. It leaves them 10 times more at risk of being isolated. And just while I'm on social media, I know you've given me a magic wand, but I'm making this magic wand stretch.
Go for it. If I had somebody give me a magic wand, you might be stuck in the chair for about an hour.
In terms of social media, Kelly, I mean, I know people people need to be made aware, and there is, the press and all should be allowed to publish details and stuff. But some of the stuff on some of these social media platforms are so destructive. I mean, I have personally worked with children who have got to the extreme where they don't want to live anymore, because they can't face the backlash of what has been published or printed. And if they go to school and nobody, a few handful of people who they trust know that their daddy's in prison, well, by the time one of these social media platforms are finished, everybody knows. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes the details are definitely bumped up, or they're exaggerated, made to look worse. And I suppose the courts, I think if I had a magic wand, I think the court system would consider the views, the need for people in prison not to be cut off from the rest of the world, not to be cut off from their families. And I think a lot of time that needs to be given consideration, and when courts are sentencing people, I think there should be some sort of a plan for the family. I mean, and I know there's not the resources to appoint a support worker or such, but even a plan, some sort of recognition that this family on the outside struggling. We are hoping to do courses around healthy relationships, parenting separately, be that while daddy's in prison or be that when daddy's getting out. Let's sit down and get some evidence-based support into these families, so that when dad gets out, that the motivating factor of, if he has been engaging with his family and things are back on track, that there's something there to help motivate them, and that there's support then for the other parent who obviously needs who's also gone through an awful lot. There's support there for the whole family to try to keep this family together, because innately children want their parents. You know, they want to be loved, and they want, even if their father isn't there or their dad is in prison, they want to know, and they need to know, that they're loved.
Thank you very much, Edell McKee. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
So thanks to my guest, Edell McKee. For further information on relationship support, briefing papers and other podcasts, check out relateni.org. You can also listen to these podcasts from your regular platforms.